Spring has sprung, winter has returned. Some places have already seen snow. Many others will see snow over the next few days. Hello, I'm Met Office meteorologist and weather presenter Aidan McGivern. Thank you for joining me for another edition of the Met Office Deep Dive, where I'll be taking a detailed look at the weather across the UK. This week, focusing on the next few days, with just a hint towards the end of what we're expecting at the weekend and beyond. But really, there's a lot to talk about over the next few days, so that's what I'll be focusing on this week. And if you enjoy these deep dives into the UK's weather, where we take a 15-20 minute look at all the details behind the current weather and the forecast weather, please do hit the subscribe button. It helps us to justify doing more of these in the future. We do them every Tuesday. They're exclusive to our YouTube channel. On the screen behind me, you can see the UK and you can see the radar. And what we're seeing at the moment, as you can see from the blue colours, is a band of rain sweeping south across the UK. This is the radar since midnight last night. But there are some whites appearing, and those white areas are showing where it's currently sleeting or snowing, or there's some hail as well. So any white precipitation indicated by the whites, any liquid precipitation indicated by the blue. So you can see it's quite a messy setup across the south. Some areas seeing rain, some areas seeing a bit of sleet. Nothing too severe right now, but we're properly into the cold air there across northern Scotland into northeast England. Snow showers piling in, and we have seen reports of 12-13 centimetres of snow in places at Altnahara, Aberdeen Airport, Dyce Airport. So there is some significant snow building up, but because of the showery nature of these snow showers, of course, it is hit and miss. Now, here's the setup. We've been flagging it for some time. We've been talking about an increased chance of cold air in the first week of March, and that is indeed what we are now seeing. The first week of March, we're seeing the jet stream to the south of the UK. There's the jet stream. This is the weather front clearing southern parts of the UK on Tuesday. And let's turn off those layers and put on the temperatures, because, well, you can see there, Arctic air coming south, the winds all the way from the north, this straight line towards northern parts of the UK, and quite a strong wind for northern Scotland. That's what's bringing those snow showers in during the rest of Tuesday. Now, over the next few days, I'll just play that forward. Over the next few days, you can see that those northerly winds continue across northern parts of the UK. They do ease slightly into Tuesday night, so the inland penetration of those showers for northern Scotland and into northeast England will tend to become more limited overnight. And actually, for much of the north of the UK, it's going to be mainly dry, bright, but still staying cold. Now you can see a change taking place towards the south. These milder colours there starting to make inroads, but on the leading edge of that, it's a very steep gradient. I'll show you more on that in a moment, between the mild air to the south and the cold air across most of the UK. And it's on that boundary where we're going to see that increased risk over the next few days of some more prolonged sleet and snow. And so the boundary on Tuesday night into Wednesday and the first part of Thursday is across the south of the UK. But as you can see, as we get deeper into later this week, you can see those milder colours make inroads across southern parts of the UK. So, you know, a real increased temperature trend there. The cold air hangs on in the north with this easterly or northeasterly wind, southwesterlies into the south, and then that boundary shifts north. And that's the significant thing. By this stage, you can see the wind arrow is rotating around an area of low pressure, and that low pressure providing a weather front, providing a band of rain, strong winds, and as a result, in between the cold air and the mild air, we're going to see some significant and potentially disruptive snowfall in places. More on that in a moment. It's northern parts of the UK later this week that we're particularly concerned about. But for the next day or so, actually it's further south. And I'm going to show you in a bit more detail about the weather over the next few days for southern parts of the UK. Now, this is the rest of Tuesday. And that weather front I mentioned that's bringing that mixture of rain, sleet and snow, it does tend to clear its way south. And so by the end of Tuesday, this is Tuesday evening as the sun goes down, for many southern parts of the UK it's drier. The sun starts to come out, mainly to the north of the M4. A few light showers continuing and staying damp across Cornwall, but mostly this is rain at this stage. Now, further north, it's very cold indeed, and we've got those snow showers continuing into northern Scotland, as well as Northern Ireland. And overnight temperatures will be dropping quite significantly as the winds fall a bit lighter. We can talk about temperatures overnight. I'm not sure if the graphics will quite show it here, the extent of the chill by the start of Wednesday, but typically -3 to -5 Celsius across Scotland and Northern Ireland and Northern England, and in some spots where we've got a bit of shelter and a bit of snow cover, potentially as low as -15 Celsius for northern parts of Scotland. You can see the very cold air entrenched there across northern Scotland. Now, for northern Scotland, for northeast England as well, and Northern Ireland, the snow showers will tend to ease, but it's in these areas where there is that risk of some icy patches by the start of Wednesday. So we've got a couple of weather warnings there. North and east Scotland into parts of eastern England, as well as northern and eastern Northern Ireland. The snow and ice warning here talks about the risk of some further accumulations of snowfall, a few more centimetres occurring through the day, in some prone spots as much as 5 to 8 centimetres. But I think the main hazard in those areas is going to be that risk of icy patches, so for those parts of the UK. Now further south, we've got this warning coming into effect on Tuesday night into Wednesday, and it continues into Thursday. And that is because what we've got is a waving weather front. Now just move on to this here and play it forward. The same front that clears, bringing that area of rain, sleet and snow southwards during the rest of Tuesday, tends to merge with this other system coming up from the Atlantic. And remember, there's very mild air to the south of this. And what happens is these weather fronts, they're quite complicated features at this stage. They're just going to slide across southern counties of England and South Wales and just wriggle about during Tuesday night into the start of Wednesday, into Wednesday night. And it's this boundary between the cold air and the mild air where we see these weather fronts. That's essentially what weather fronts are. They mark the boundary between cold and mild. And along that boundary, it just oscillates. It just ebbs and flows across southern counties of England. And there's a very sharp temperature gradient, which I'll show you in just a second, that will mark the distinction between rain and snow. And predicting exactly where that temperature gradient is going to be is a big challenge, even at this range. And that's because these weather fronts aren't cleanly sweeping across the UK in one fell swoop. They're just wriggling across the bottom of the UK. So just to play forward the graphics for overnight into the start of Wednesday, let's pause it there. And this is mid-afternoon Wednesday. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if some parts of southern England and South Wales wake up to a couple of centimetres of snow Wednesday morning. I think the greater hazard will be icy patches rather than huge amounts of snow on Wednesday morning. Then the rain, sleet, snow, it's quite a messy mixture, tends to ease off a little before more of it comes back later in the day on Wednesday. And it's really after dark on Wednesday. You can see these brighter colours here indicating some heavy rain. And as the rain turns heavier and as the sun goes down, the air cools and you get this more extensive area of snow developing. Now let's zoom in a bit. What you'll notice as well elsewhere across the UK, it is mostly dry on Wednesday. So there's still a few showers of snow for northern Scotland, for example, into northeast England. But the main focus at this stage is on southern parts of the UK. And you can see how it is this mixture of rain, sleet and snow. But where we get some heavier precipitation, it cools the atmosphere, you get the snow, and after dark the surface temperatures cool off. And so I think that the main threat of some significant and disruptive snow across this broad area of southern England into South Wales is really after dark on Wednesday. During the Wednesday evening rush hour in particular, and you'll see there it's affecting parts of London, the home counties, the southeast, into central southern England as well. Now I mentioned that there's a steep temperature gradient, and this is worth looking at because this really highlights it. This is the freezing level. So for snow to fall, you need a freezing level that's fairly low down. It doesn't have to be on the surface, but the freezing level is essentially the height at which the temperature goes below zero in the atmosphere. And typically you'd need about 200 metres or 300 metres or so for the height of the 0 degree level for snow to fall, but if you've got really heavy rain falling, then that helps to cool the atmosphere, and you can see snow falling at 400 metres as a result. But as you can see, at the start of Wednesday 1 a.m, most of the UK has this very low freezing level, 200 metres, 0. But what we're seeing is a much higher freezing level come into the south. These greens, which indicate above 1400 metres. So there's no in between here. It's either pretty much 200 metres or 300 metres, or it's 1400 metres. And all those colours there are represented by this very narrow line across the south. And what you can see as we start off Wednesday, into Wednesday afternoon, is these very high freezing levels getting into Cornwall. So that would indicate rain. And along the south coast as well, there we've got the very high freezing levels. But, quite evidently, a few, 10, 20 mile difference in the boundary of that would make a big difference in terms of whether it's raining or snowing. So quite clearly, as we go into Wednesday afternoon, there's some uncertainty about the precise location of that boundary between the very cold air and the much milder air to the south. And that's such a sharp gradient, and it's just wriggling across the south coast all the way through Tuesday night, Wednesday night as well, that it makes it very tricky to predict exactly which locations here are going to see rain, sleet or snow. But really, if you're thinking about snow locations, M4 corridor looks likely to see some snow. Just to the south of that, likely to see some snow as we end Wednesday, and just to the north. And there'll be an area, a zone where we've got A, the low freezing level, and B, you've got the heavier precipitation that will lead to the potential for disruption. So let's go back to the warnings. That's not the warnings. There we go. And take a look at that area covered. That area is where there is that risk of disruption across southern parts of England, South Wales, through Wednesday and into the start of Thursday. How much snow are we talking? At first on Wednesday, from that initial pulse that happens overnight into Tuesday night into Wednesday, in some places very little, in other places perhaps a centimetre or two, and in 1 or 2 spots there's the potential for 5 centimetres. But the biggest risk from snow in this area comes from later Wednesday, so after dark on Wednesday, and that's when there's the risk in some places of 5 to 10 centimetres of snowfall. And of course, if that's focused around London, through the M4, M5, for example, the significant risk of disruption as a result. But a lot depends on the precise location of not only that freezing level, but the pulses of heavier precipitation, which will just ebb and flow across southern counties of England and Wales. Now, further north, we've got this area from Thursday into Friday, where our attention turns, because that's when there's the risk of significant disruption across much of Scotland, northern England into North Wales, North Midlands, Northern Ireland. And that's because by this stage, we're going to see the jet stream pick up another area of low pressure, skip forward here, and deepen it. Now, the main uncertainty on Thursday and Friday comes from the depth and the track of this area of low pressure. Some computer models don't have it that deep, don't have a lot of rain stroke snow associated with it. Other computer models do spin up quite a vigorous system. This, at the moment, looks fairly plausible. An area of low pressure picked up by the jet stream and pushed north across the UK. From Thursday morning, also, as that low pressure arrives, we're going to see much milder air spreading north across the UK. So that snow risk that I mentioned for the south completely disappears during Thursday. It turns much milder, but the snow risk, that boundary between the mild and the cold air, moves north as the jet stream pushes north. And here's where we are Friday morning. Now, there's still some uncertainty about the exact track of this low. Nothing uncertain at this stage, but it makes a big difference, of course, to where we're going to see the snow and how much snow. And some computer models have it more focused towards North Wales, North Midlands into Northern England. Others have it further north, with rain for the southern half of the UK and snow mainly focused for Northern England, Northern Ireland and for much of Scotland. So those are the kinds of uncertainties we're talking about. We're also looking at uncertainties in terms of how heavy any precipitation will be and how deep the low will be and how strong the winds will be. So some details to iron out, but the general theme is fairly solid. Low pressure moving across central parts of the UK. That's going to exist in the boundary between cold air to the north and much milder air to the south. And here's how it looks on these graphics. We've got bands of rain at this stage on Thursday coming in to the south. They move north and then across the Welsh Mountains, snow, and then early hours Thursday, the snow pushing into the North Midlands, Northern England, Northern Ireland, and then really it's through the day on Thursday that snow pushes into southern and central Scotland. But like I say, a lot of uncertainty because of the precise track of that low. That's what's going to make the difference in terms of where we see the snow, where we see the rain in the south, where we see the mild air in the south, and where we see the heavier precipitation, and so on. So some details to iron out. But what looks most likely is that in this broad area here, let's just draw on a map here, we've got, that's a bit thick. That looks way too thick. Let's start again with a thinner line, although I suspect with my drawing skills it's still going to look rubbish. And we don't even want that area there either. In fact, let's go back to a better way of showing it, which is the warning map. There we go. That area is what I'm trying to talk about. That area is the area at greatest risk on Thursday and Friday of disruptive snow. Now, if you look at the warning, it talks about snow totals that are indicative of what we call the worst case scenario, so the worst kinds of impacts, not necessarily the most likely snow totals. So the snow totals I'm going to mention now are what would happen in a worst case scenario, so the most vigorous low, the heaviest precipitation, the most widespread snow. Not necessarily the most likely snow totals, because some computer models have much lower snow totals. But of course we've got to flag the worst case scenario. So the warning is mentioning the low risk of high impacts from this snowfall. But by no means are these snow totals guaranteed or the most likely solution. So what kinds of snow totals are we talking about? In this general area, 5 to 10 centimetres, and in some of the most prone spots, 20 centimetres, and over higher parts of the Pennines into the southern uplands, higher parts of the Central Belt and the Southern Highlands, the risk of 20 to 40 centimetres. So these are the kinds of worst case scenarios that we need to think about, but they're not necessarily the most likely snow totals. That would lead to high impacts, and if the computer models converge on those snow totals, of course, there would be very significant disruption by the end of the week in this area. But it does look likely that there's going to be a significant spell of snow across Scotland into northern England and Northern Ireland, perhaps into parts of Wales and the North Midlands as well, whilst it turns milder further south. Now, further south, not completely clear of disruptive weather at this stage, because there's likely to be increasingly strong winds. Here's the wind gust graphic. And you can see as that low crosses central parts of the UK, there's the risk of gales coming in around the southern part of that low. Southern England, South Wales as well, wind gusts 50, 60 miles an hour, but of course a lot relies on how deep that area of low pressure is in terms of the strength of those winds. But the winds also leading to a risk of drifting snow and blizzards for Northern England, for Scotland, over the Pennines, for example, over the southern uplands, and so on. So some very serious weather to think about for later this week, and that's not necessarily the end of it either. We go back to the bigger picture, and just to show you what's likely to happen as we end Friday, that low pressure moves away and go into the weekend. The next weather system starts to push in from the southwest, and we've still got cold air across much of the northern half of the UK in particular, perhaps even some central areas. And as that area of low pressure and its weather fronts moves in during the weekend, there's again the risk of significant and disruptive snowfall, especially once more over northern hills. So some significant snowfall on the way later this week, and potentially the continued risk of that significant snowfall into the weekend. How long will it last? You might be asking, where's spring? It's course, almost mid-March, and we're still talking about snowfall. I'll just give you an idea of what the longer range models are suggesting before we call it to an end. And this is the temperature anomaly for this week, from Monday to next Monday, from the European model. And it shows widely across the UK these blues, below average temperatures, but closer to average in the south, because of course we're seeing a cold start to the week in the south and then milder air return by the end of the week. And that's why temperatures closer to average in the south for the 7-day period. But looking at the same kind of thing for the following 7 days, so this is next Monday to the following Monday, and you can see actually above average temperatures for southern parts of the UK, around average through central parts, and then still below average. This is the most likely, below average for Scotland and the far north of England. Now what this would suggest is that for the week after next, or at least for next week, Monday to Monday, we're likely to see milder air pushing into the south, but cold air hanging on in the north. And of course, with weather systems, another thing that's quite likely for that week is that it's going to be unsettled. And with weather systems moving in, we could still see some snowfall, especially over northern hills. So yeah, if you're in the south, I think a few days of cold weather and that risk of disruption, especially on Wednesday and into Wednesday night. Then it turns much milder in the south. Across central and northern areas, the significant risk of disruption during Thursday, Friday. Further disruptive events possible through the weekend and the start of next week. And looking further ahead, the far north of the UK likely to keep the cold weather up to at least the 20th of March, whilst milder air more likely towards the south, and somewhere in between, low pressure bringing wind, rain, and in the north, the risk of snow, especially over hills. So I hope I've made that clear, as can be made at the moment. But yeah, thank you for joining me once again for this deep dive. Pleasure to have you with us. And if you enjoy this, as I say, please hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.